Come on in, sit back and relax. Welcome to the Wealth Tech Today podcast. I'm your host, Craig Iskowitz, founder of Ezra Group Consulting. And this podcast features interviews, news, and analysis on the trends and best practices all around wealth management technology. My guest for this episode was David Snider, CEO of Harnessed Wealth. David is a former CFO at Compass, a real estate company that he helped grow from pre-launch to over $350 million in revenue and expanded the firm from one office to over 30 across the country as it increased to over 1,800 staff and agents. David's also former executive in residence at Bain Capital Ventures, former contributor at Forbes magazine, and is the author of the book Moneymakers: Inside the New World of Finance and Business. David and I spoke about a bunch of interesting topics: Harness Wealth's business model and their pivot over to tax services, the recent funding round and capital allocation, and then we get into the meat: technology, how they've developed an intelligent experience for tax preparation, and how they are offering both a client-facing and advisor-facing platform, Harness for Advisors. So building out these kind of tools is critical for any vendor and for any wealth management firm that's buying this kind of software. It's important to understand how this software is going to fit into your tech stack. And that's where Ezra Group comes in, because here at Ezra Group, we've seen literally hundreds of tech stacks from RIAs and broker-dealers. And let me tell you, most of them are loaded down with tech debt. You know, tech debt can act like an anchor holding back your firm's efficiency and your ability to scale. So if you want to free your firm for exponential growth, you need to run, not walk to our website, EzraGroup.com, and click the golden Contact Us button on the homepage. The experienced team in Ezra Group can evaluate your current tech ecosystem. That's what we would call our tech eval, 90-day tech reboot, deliver targeted recommendations, optimize your existing systems and operations, even run an RFP, RFI, and help you implement new software to get your firm to the next level. Ezra Group just makes tech stacks better. You can take advantage of our free initial consultation by going to EzraGroup.com. All right. Shameless plug is over. Standard housekeeping chores. Please subscribe to this podcast, yada, yada. Go check to our sponsor, the Invest in Others Charitable Foundation at investinothers.org. And if you are a software vendor in our space, go to our website, ezragroup.com/register. Register for our vendor integration portal so you can update your integration data into our database, and your integration score that Ezra Group manages will be updated automatically. Now, let's kick this thing off. And I'm happy to introduce David Snider, founder and CEO of Harness Wealth. David, I'm really excited to talk to you today.
Thanks for having me, Craig.
And where are you calling in from?
From our offices in Tribeca in New York City.
Awesome. I'm in the city all the time. Love going in. I'm not there at the moment. I'm based in New Jersey. Right now I'm in Florida. I was just at a conference, so I'm traveling. So apologize for any audio, my normal audio quality. You got your big microphone. I didn't bring my big microphone. I'm just winging it here. So we're gonna jump in. Can you give us a 30-second elevator pitch for Harness Wealth?
Of course. Harness serves two different groups, but in a very interchangeable way. So we are a platform for helping individuals with complexity navigate financial, tax, and trust and estate services, what they need, who they should be doing it with, and helping to facilitate that. On the other side of the platform, we found, and we'll dive into this, I'm sure, that tax was the service area that had the most demand not being well met by the existing advisor, at least advisors as they are set up today. And so we've spent a considerable amount of time and focus on really building a vertically integrated solution around tax to power exceptional tax advisors and the experience that they provide to their clients and how efficiently they're able to run their practices as part of that overall ecosystem.
So vertically integrated solution around tax. So I'm very interested in that. So the platform you built has basically end-to-end functionality, but have you pivoted into tax? Is this more of a primary focus for you, or how are you pitching the firm when you're talking to advisors and clients?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly evolved where when I started the company, when I was in EIR at Bain Capital Ventures, sort of suspected that yes, it was critically important and a differentiator for us to have financial advisory, tax, and trust and estate in the platform. But hey, building for the RIA, they're at the center of the ecosystem, or the FA, whatever. That's where we're going to spend our time. And it was definitely during the journey that we realized tax is actually a little bit more interesting in many respects in terms of its relative importance to the client, the fact that it's a painkiller versus a vitamin service, and the gap that we saw between uh, expectation or interest and what was being delivered, that we've really been focused there with a disproportionate amount of our energy and time for the past several years.
So you mentioned something that I always find fascinating about product marketing, the painkiller versus vitamins, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain that for anybody who isn't aware of that and how you took that to heart?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, we had this macro view that the complexity for the average professional, higher earning individual was increasing, that there had been a ton of great innovation by other fintechs at the entry points of financial services, neobanks, robo-advisors, insurtechs, you name it, but a lot less, at least proportionally, in the segment of the market where people had complexity that exceeded the DIY, but didn't necessarily rise to the well above federal estate tax exemption, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars threshold. Within that, obviously a lot of things that you can do to optimize, anything that is incrementally beneficial to your financial well-being is a vitamin. You don't really necessarily feel the benefit of it day one, but if you do it, I presume it's a good one. You ought to get some value that compounds over, multiple years in terms of your health and wellness. Painkillers, like, I got a problem today. Something is bothering me. How do I make that go away? And a painkiller, if it's effective, presumably, within a short period of time, is offering you relief. And so the fact that there is a federally, and for many of us, state mandated set of timelines that you have to do something, or there are negative consequences if you don't, sort of makes it, in our view, a painkiller service that people need to solve for it. Obviously, they can do it themselves as one solution. But if they don't want to do that, don't have the comfort, expertise, et cetera, to do so, or don't love their provider, then it becomes, a painkiller service, one you need to find to get you through the issue.
You touched on a couple things in that answer. I appreciate that. So you had a fascinating career. I always appreciate people who started out or passed through consulting through their careers. As I run a consulting firm, so and you came through Bain Capital. So how did that experience help you building this technology-enabled advisor model? How did it influence your vision for Harness?
Well, I think I would not be the professional, whatever that means today, without having benefited greatly from Bain Company's training and Bain Capital's. I think that there are a bunch of folks that come to me for career advice, and I sort of caution that yes, there's definitely an appeal, more so than 20 plus years ago, to jump right into early stage companies. Obviously, you can hit it phenomenally if it's wildly successful and a ton of opportunity, but the investment that big professional service companies and investment firms make in training and a progress because they are talent building, talent extracting machines is really outsized. And so I definitely would not have wanted to start anywhere else. And so I think just the ability to ask good questions, to feel comfortable in a room. I mean, we're fortunate that we're partnered with two of the 10 largest financial service companies in the country in terms of their tax referral needs, et cetera. I think just the comfort of talking to people, understanding their needs and how to seek to address it systematically and how to communicate clearly in emails, in PowerPoints or Google Slides or whatever you do. I have found, I think, can serve you well in any application. I think as it relates to subject matter areas, the company that I worked on building before Harness, Compass, the tech-enabled real estate brokerage, I had spent, a year of time at Bain Capital working on a real estate deal. It was only tangentially probably relevant, but I think it piqued my interest in um, that experience from the work prior to that in financial services that, hey, all things being equal, I get more excited than average, than most, when it comes to problems that are in that financial service and real estate ecosystem, especially those that end up touching the individual and not just kind of enterprise finance or enterprise real estate. So that interest certainly led me down the path, ultimately led to Compass, and from Compass, sort of the key observation being tech enabling advisors in a space where the client still really relies upon the advice and the strength of the relationship is really powerful. And I think still today, but certainly even more so 5 years ago, 10 years ago, really good UI, UX, intuitive collaboration technology that powers client advisor relationships in these high stakes areas, real estate, insurance, financial advisory, tax, et cetera, is not where I think it could and should be, which is where the opportunity hopefully presents itself.
Well, thank you. That leads me into my next question very nicely, David. So, talking about UI UX collaboration tech for these high stake areas and how it's going to need a lot of money to build out those kind of capabilities and really understand how how to make it work. So, you recently um, scored a $17 million Series A extension that brings your total funding to $36 million. So, how are you prioritizing the investments for growth with this new capital? Is it going into UI UX? Is it going to the back end? Is it going to AI? What are you doing with it?
Yep. So it's expanding the scope of what we can offer advisors and our clients. We believe that within tax, automation is the driving thrust, and automation now sort of has to incorporate elements of the capability that AI unlocks. But it's very challenging to base your entire business on your own model and staying ahead of the competition, et cetera. And so we see those pieces as a means to an end of being more and more valuable in enabling tax advisors in the same way that we had hoped to do with real estate advisors at Compass, to spend as little of their time as possible doing repetitive tasks or things that are not uniquely benefiting from their advice or time in front of a client. And so that started with this past year, created an entirely intelligent experience for tax, where if you're a new client, returning client, your client questionnaire is dramatically more intuitive. It captures information you provided previously, drives up the amount of information people provide by a multiple of the baseline our advisors had before. Same thing with the data that you want a client to provide in that process. Let them dump files in, auto-categorize them, rename them, match that to what they provided in prior years, like all this stuff that you can build on top of from really big models, Gemini, OpenAI, whatever the case may be. So that's what our view is. How do you take the best of the tech innovation, but use it in very custom built ways to dramatically increase the efficiency of the advisor and the insight, seamlessness, and efficiency for the consumers they serve?
So, I'm interested in what you're talking about and how you explain that. So, building an entirely intelligent experience, and where are you getting all this data to make it more intuitive? Obviously, if you're capturing information, that's easy, but where are you pulling data from to verify, hey, this is exactly what you told me last time, or this isn't what you told me last time?
Yeah. Well, I think the advantage is we have the data that we need. I mean, we're not using data from the clients down the way, but like we're resurfacing back for the Iskowitz household. Like this is information that we already have, or these are files that were provided. We're reading the information in files previously provided, newly provided, to sort of match up and reconcile, and then overlaying a process for data extraction and transformation for the creation of the outputs that you're looking for. So it's not an application of AI where we need to consume massive amounts of data to provide some aggregated insight based upon, mass consumer behavior. I think we see a lot of opportunity both for the end client, the tax advisor, and also for the financial advisor who we've built to be part of this ecosystem, to be permissioned in the client portal and to play a key role of having insights that are extracted out of both the underlying tax statements that go into a completed 1040, 1065, et cetera. But that also is taking a structured and reasonably complete data set and being able to intelligently understand what is in there or could be in there.
I want to touch on sort of the life of a founder. We work with a lot of startups, and we talk to a lot of startups, and one of the big issues they have is keeping themselves afloat while they're building a business, which usually starts with zero revenue. So there are pros and cons to getting a big check, as I'm sure you're aware. So can maybe you explain that for other founders or people looking to found a company? How do you stay afloat while you're building the business? Obviously it's harder if it's easier, you just got out of college, you have no expenses living at home.
Right.
For people who may be in middle age but have an idea, how do they get from zero to a product but still manage to keep themselves alive?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that's nice is some of the tech innovation we're just talking about has definitely brought down the curves. I've seen data from a bunch of VCs that the amount of capital you need to get to a prototype to sort of validate interest is dramatically less than it was 5 years, 10 years, 20 years ago. So I think the good news is you can get indication of interest and leverage that into potentially external funding faster. It's no surprise that many of the wealthiest people in the country that build businesses did so in ways that didn't require a lot of capital and therefore dilution. I mean, Mike Bloomberg had no outside capital or very little. Microsoft took very little capital, a number of others, et cetera. So there's definitely downsides to what we and lots of others have done, which is if you're fortunate enough to have a track record to raise capital out of the gate, you're giving away disproportionately more at every stage as you have more risk to those that are providing you capital to do it. So there are like two potential traps. One is like you just want to be aware of, like, depending on how convinced you are of an opportunity or value, what you end up with at the end is going to be proportionate to what you had to give away to finance the goalpost from A to B. I think the other that a bunch of companies found in the SoftBank freewheeling, Tiger freewheeling era, including my last business, is if given a lot of capital, there becomes a ton of internal and sometimes external pressure from that investor to deploy it because they want to be able to have this bifurcated outcome of their portfolio. And in their interest to have a lot of people deploy quickly, see who does that well. It doesn't, which works from a portfolio management perspective, may not work in the best interest of that founder or company, where you're either taking a lot of dilution, you're pegging your value, quite highly even to get that capital if it's less dilution, but that then limits your ability to have a full liquidity that is above that threshold, et cetera. So there are a lot of potential traps and considerations. Again, all good problems to have, especially in the last 24 months of just being able to access capital when you want it, need it, et cetera. But there are definitely, some considerations. I mean, I heard it was in a forum with Robert's Rules, so I can't say the name of the person, but, arguably one of the 10 most successful capital raiser business builders kind of in the tech ecosystem of late. And, he had just raised a 9-figure amount of capital. And this is in this more challenging period of whatever we are, 2022, 2023. But he was saying, like, I have a capital work back plan. He's had multiple successful exits from the end, which is I expect to go public at this amount of revenue and this value based upon that revenue, a certain multiple. And I'm going to work back to what each of those stages and gates look like to know what ownership should look like. And more aggressively than most, he actually has built in, or he described having built in economics that are wildly favorable to him if he meets or exceeds that, but is really expensive if he doesn't, in terms of, like, I don't know if it's taking preferred or what the threshold, but very high guaranteed returns for investors before he gets dollars back, including some he invested himself. So long answer to short question, but having been a professional fundraiser for the better part of the last decade, I do spend a good amount of time thinking about it.
I thought you might. Yeah, and I'm sure that person you're speaking about wasn't going to lose his shirt if he didn't deliver, right?
Yes,
And he's betting on himself, in effect, so he can afford to have an all or nothing outcome.
Right.
Right. But most people can't do that. But you're talking about people who are in the tech industry, and they're often the next generation wealth providers, and many of them have equity compensation. And I want to keep digging in the David Snider bio here. So you would mention that you made some equity comp decisions for yourself that cost you into the seven figures. So how did that experience shape Harness Wealth's approach to serving clients with complex equity situations?
Yep. Well, unfortunately, it wasn't even just me. It was me and a bunch of other early folks at Compass. I took on the role of head of finance and operations when I was still in my second year of business school, and sought out two entrepreneurial finance professors at HBS when some people in the company were asking about, should we offer an early exercise program for the traditional equity pool that was being allocated from, and both sort of said, hey, the value of an option is it's an option. You shouldn't really be encouraging people to exercise early because then they're putting up capital and who knows, and like if it's a good outcome, that's great, and if it's not, why would you put stuff at risk? And I would say that generically might have been okay advice, but as it related to one, Section 1202, the Qualified Small Business Program being written into law as part of the aftermath of the Great Recession, definitely changed the calculus when holding stock versus options makes the first 10 million plus tax-free. Definitely changed the calculus when you've got founders that have had multiple successful exits and the likelihood is higher and the cost basis is the same as the exercise cost. So you're avoiding any tax from exercising when the cost base is the same, et cetera. So that proved quite expensive, of having a lot of what would have been shares still in options, down the road, et cetera. Exercised a lot, but not as many as I would have if we'd had that in place. That was very much part of the driving thesis, which was for individuals with moderate to high complexity, but not massive liquidity, there is nuance that is needed. People tend to receive that and put it into action best when it's delivered by humans who have a ton of expertise. And so how do we build a platform that helps unlock what is generally highly decentralized advice providers, in that 99% of US CPA firms have less than 5 million of revenue. Lots of the trusted state attorneys are not at top 10 firms if you don't want to be paying massive amounts to get a trust done or a grat done, et cetera. And lots of great financial advisors are not at Goldman or Morgan Stanley, but other places. So all those things kind of fit into it.
So I'm pulling out a couple of phrases that are going to summarize this conversation. So painkiller versus vitamin, then complexity versus liquidity, right? You have high complexity, but limited liquidity. And that's going to be a problem. And also having too much money for a startup, right? So we've seen firms that have too much money waste it all because they're trying to build grandiose plans, versus firms that had limitations on themselves, had to come up with unique ways to build great products. Like we saw with DeepSeek, they had limited funds and limited chips. So they had to build a better solution, a better mousetrap. So they were able to do that.
And turning back just for a second to the second point you made about complexity without liquidity, part of the driver in tax and of our thesis has been people like me in those early Compass days often have to make decisions well before there's liquidity that will have massive implications in future value. And so building a service delivery model that helps people to navigate through that stuff was really important to us. So we kind of pioneered this idea of a equity planning session for individuals that don't necessarily need a CPA to complete their 1040 because there's not a lot of complexity, but they do need a very bespoke conversation around stock option exercise or participation in a sale or something else before the liquidity comes. We're expanding into, the way people think about investing alternatives and downstream tax complexity. We really invest in trying to help people make important decisions before they're asked to pay giant fees to get advised on it.
I drill down into this because I find that most financial advisors don't do well, or rather, only a small percentage of financial advisors do well with small business owners. Right? And whatever the small business is, for example, I happen to own a tech business, but could own any small business. And every advisor wants small businesses as their clients because they are expecting a liquidity event at some point.
Right.
But you need to provide some value to them. Why am I working with you if you don't know anything about how to run a business, how to value a business, how to increase the value of the business? Can you be, I hear advisors say, well, we're going to be your CFO. Well, that's a big take, as you remember, as your head of finance.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things involved. Should I take money out of the business? Should I take a salary? If I want to bring on a partner, how do I do that? What's the proper way to do that? How do I provide, if I want to sell software that one of my clients helped me build, how do I design a royalty process for them? And there's really nobody, especially certainly financial advisors, who are willing to jump in and figure out how to answer those questions.
Yeah. And I think your needs evolve over time, which is partly why we wanted to set up a structure where the right advisor, source of advice at one chapter, setting up a business or doing whatever, may be different at an inflection of liquidity or when, your partner is creating a business and you've been, in a more traditional role, et cetera. So totally agree.
I want to go back to some things you said about data. So we talked about tax. So I've seen complaints from clients who are working with advisors who also offer tax, which I think is a benefit. I think most advisory firms should also offer tax and legal and state because it's a holistic way of viewing things. But they don't talk to each other, right? So the tax team is over here and the advisor's over here. He'll throw the statements over the wall, but there's really not a lot of communication. Then the tax people come to you and say, well, give me all information. Well, like the advisor knows everything. Why don't you gather all this throughout the year? Why are you dumping a planner on me in February? Now I got to give you all this information. You know my businesses. You know if I've changed. You know how many employees I have. You know if I moved or didn't move, if I got married or didn't marry. Why am I telling you? I have to repeat myself. You're all the same company.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would say we definitely do see the desire from a reasonable, not the majority chunk of folks that they would like stuff. Well, everyone would like stuff to be coordinated and to avoid duplication of efforts. I think for many, that's obviously, well, if I can get everything done by one firm, that would be better. I think to your point, what we tend to see are at the ultra high end, yes, like they're going to get stuff done. They have, people that are at a quality that makes sense because the fees are so high.
Yeah, the ultra high now, they don't worry about a thing. When you're at that level, they're groveling at your feet for more work. It's
right.
It's the not mass affluent, but the Henrys, like they're not wealthy yet, but
right. And what we found is the financial firms that try to do tax in-house, all you're doing really is 1040s. It's so seasonal that like you can't staff it with the best people and pay appropriately compared to the market. And so you're stuck with a product offering that works reasonably well for some of the people most of the time that leads to friction. And it's not the core profit areas. They don't want to invest in, great data transferring and all this other stuff. And so what we found is by being a best of breed tax solution where the financial advisor can be permissioned in the client portal, can understand what's going on, get notified, et cetera. But it's a best of breed advisor for tax, separate from a best of breed financial advisor doing planning and investment management, tends to, have better outcomes with the same thrust. But obviously, biased by the approach that we take.
Oh, of course. Yeah. All right. So we are running out of time, man. I told you the time goes fast on these podcasts. So I've only got time for one more question. I noticed that you offer both a client-facing platform and harness for advisors, which includes practice management software. So what have you learned about advisor technology needs that weren't being addressed by existing solutions?
So I think, where we started on the financial advisor side was there continues to be sort of demand for new clients and new clients that are curated and high intent. So that's really where we've been able to focus is we can curate dozens of, not even hundreds of great financial advisors for those that want a different process for doing so. That I think is really straightforward. On the tax side, what we found was that both sides of the ecosystem had similar pain points. The discovery process was complicated because we don't really know how to evaluate a new tax advisor other than a friend, colleague, someone being like, oh yeah, Craig's really good. You should work with Craig. The tax advisor doesn't know whether you're going to be paying to work with or how much complexity when they jump on the phone. Are you just trying to get free advice? Are you, adding complexity? So we've solved for that piece. Then it was how do you actually move information back and forth as efficiently as possible? And the third is how do you automate what is automatable so that the advisor is actually spending more time advising rather than doing compliance and execution. The same way, you don't want your FA rebalancing your portfolio manually if it can be done automatically and they can spend time thinking about, whether you're on track to pay for your second kid's college tuition and other things. So similar thrust in terms of the tax advisory side and then how we can tie the different pieces together. But I think it's very easily measurable in terms of us being able to save tax advisors, multiple hours per year per client and stuff they would have to do that isn't adding incremental value. And in some cases, it's taking away value. It's a lot more back and forth on administrative stuff. And the same thing on the client side of cutting their time in half or more savings in the process of more intelligently gathering information.
Man, I'd love to keep going deeper on this, but we are out of time. Dave, where can people find more information about Harness Wealth?
Harnesswealth.com is sort of a one-stop shop, and I'm reasonably active on LinkedIn. So if folks are curious to chat, don't hesitate to DM me. I will find it somewhere there as well.
You heard it, everyone. DM David on LinkedIn. Dave, thanks for being here, man.
My pleasure. Thank you, Craig.
Hey, it's Craig again. Here are my top 3 takeaways from this episode. I was very interested in Harvest Wealth's pivot to tax services, how they identify tax as an area with the highest demand and position Painkiller services due to mandatory deadlines and potential negative consequences. Painkillers are always sell better than vitamins. Unfortunately, I wish vitamins sold better, but for some reason, human nature is such that people would rather buy painkillers than vitamins. Harness Wealth recently raised a $17 million Series A extension, bringing the total funding to $36 million, and they're prioritizing the investments in expanding scope of advisor and client offerings, enhancing the automation and AI capabilities, which we're very interested in, and improving UI UX for seamless collaboration. Some of the technology they've built, an intelligent experience for tax prep. They're leveraging client data to auto-populate forms, categorize documents, and streamline processes. And they're focusing on increasing advisor efficiency. One of those things they're doing is exploring AI applications while maintaining a human-centric advice model. I like that. Well, you've reached the end of this episode of the Wealth Tech Today podcast. Thanks for listening. But before you go, head to our website, EzraGroup.com, scroll to the bottom of the homepage, and sign up for our newsletter. Once a month, you receive an email chock full of wealth management goodness, news, information, and updates. You will not be disappointed. Thanks again for listening, and talk to you all again next time.